You pulled that plant this week, probably more than once. It's growing through the crack in your driveway, along the edge of your garden bed, coming up between the pavers on your patio. Nobody planted it, nobody watered it, nobody asked it to be there. And every time it shows up, you grab it by the base, yank it out, toss it in the trash, and move on. I need to tell you what you've been throwing away. Because the plant you've been treating as a nuisance, the one that grows without any help, survives drought, survives neglect, survives being walked on, survives being pulled out and coming back 3 days later, that plant contains more iron than spinach. More omega-3 fatty acids than most of the fish sold in plastic packaging at your grocery store. More vitamin A than carrots. More magnesium than almost any leafy green you've ever paid money for. The plant you've been removing from your yard week after week for free, without a second thought, is nutritionally superior to the vegetables you're driving to the store to buy. And there's something else. Something that took me a long time to fully understand. Physicians in the 19th century prescribed this plant by name. Ancient civilizations cultivated it as a primary food crop, not a side crop, a staple. Roman soldiers carried it on military campaigns because it didn't rot, required no cooking, and maintained health under conditions destroying everything else they were eating. Indigenous cultures on 6 continents independently discovered this plant and built food traditions around it lasting thousands of years. It never disappeared. It's in your yard right now. And at some point in the last 100 years, someone made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a public announcement, just a quiet economic decision, to reclassify everything that couldn't be sold through a supply chain as a weed, as something to be controlled, as something to be eliminated. That reclassification cost us something real. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what this plant is, what it does inside your body at a biological level, why it vanished from our tables despite never being proven inferior, and why the nutritional gap it left behind might be more significant than anyone in the food industry has an incentive to tell you about. When you understand what I'm about to show you, you're never going to look at your yard the same way again. The name is Portulaca oleracea. Most people know it as Purslane. And if you've never heard that name before, notice something. You've almost certainly seen this plant hundreds of times. You've almost certainly pulled it out of the ground dozens of times. The fact that you didn't know its name, didn't know what it was, didn't know what it carried, that is not an accident. That is the result of something specific that happened to our relationship with plants over the course of the 20th century. In 100 grams of fresh purslane, roughly a generous handful, the amount you might pull from a single square foot of your garden, there are approximately 350 milligrams of alpha-linolenic acid. That is the plant-based form of omega-3 fatty acid. The same type found in flaxseed and walnuts. The type your body uses as a precursor to EPA and DHA. The omega-3 forms most closely associated with cardiovascular health, reduced inflammation, and brain function. For comparison, most leafy greens contain omega-3 in amounts so small they barely register. Spinach has some. Kale has some. But purslane has concentrations that researchers, when they first properly measured them in the 1980s and 1990s, genuinely weren't expecting to find in a plant of this type. A study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology documented the nutritional profile of wild harvested purslane collected from open fields, not cultivated under controlled conditions, not supplemented with anything, just growing the way it grows in your yard. The omega-3 concentrations were consistently higher than in commercially cultivated leafy greens grown in conventional soil with standard agricultural inputs. The plant nobody was tending outperformed the plants an entire industry was optimizing. That finding has been replicated. It is not contested in the scientific literature. Beyond the omega-3, the nutritional profile is remarkable across the board. A 100-gram serving provides roughly 44% of the recommended daily intake of vitamin A. It contains vitamin C at levels comparable to citrus fruit by weight. Its calcium content is higher than milk on a per-calorie basis. Its iron content exceeds spinach. Its potassium concentration is higher than bananas. Every one of those facts describes a plant that grows in your garden without being invited. There is one more compound worth noting. Betalain pigments, responsible for the slightly reddish-purple coloration in purslane stems, function as antioxidants, neutralizing free radicals before they cause cellular damage. Multiple independent research groups have now decided betalains are worth serious attention. None of this nutritional density is an accident. This is a plant that has survived unaided in virtually every climate on Earth, across every continent except Antarctica, for millions of years. The biological mechanisms it developed to accomplish that survival are, from a nutritional biochemistry perspective, exactly what a human body recognizes as high-quality food. The plant's toughness and its nutritional density come from the same source, the same adaptation expressed in different terms. This part of the story has a specific answer, and it is not the answer most people expect. Purslane did not disappear because someone proved it was inferior. It did not disappear because it was difficult to grow. The opposite problem exists. It grows so easily, so aggressively, with so little help, that controlling it in a monoculture operation is a genuine logistical challenge. It did not disappear because of flavor. The French served it sautéed in butter in Parisian restaurants through the 19th century. Greeks have eaten it raw in salads for millennia. Mexicans call it verdolaga and have been cooking it with pork and stews for centuries. Turks put it in soups. Lebanese add it to fattoush. Purslane disappeared because of the economic logic of 20th century industrial agriculture. The food system that emerged after World War II needed crops grown at continental scale, responding predictably to synthetic fertilizers, withstanding mechanical harvesting, surviving refrigerated transport across thousands of miles without visible degradation, and sitting on a grocery shelf for a week and still selling. Purslane failed every single one of those criteria. It loses texture within hours of harvesting. It photographs poorly after a day off the plant. It grows in the irregular patterns of something never bred for uniformity. It cannot be harvested mechanically without destroying most of what you're trying to collect. And because it appears in fields uninvited, competing with intended crops, it was categorized not as a food source but as a problem. The word weed does not describe a botanical category. It describes an economic relationship. A weed is a plant that grows where it isn't profitable for it to grow. Purslane was not reclassified because anyone studied it and concluded it was worthless. It was reclassified because the system being built had no place for a plant that wouldn't cooperate with industrial logistics. That reclassification happened gradually, through the accumulated assumptions of farmers, extension agents, and gardening guides all working from the same industrial template. By the time research began seriously documenting Purslane's nutritional profile, 3 generations of Americans had already been trained, without ever being explicitly taught, to see it as something to eliminate. Consider what that timing means. The same period during which purslane was being systematically removed from American gardens was the period during which omega-3 deficiency began to be recognized as a public health concern. Researchers were documenting the consequences of a food system that had dramatically reduced the omega-3 content of the average diet. And throughout that same period, a plant with unusually high omega-3 concentration was growing voluntarily in the same yards where the people experiencing those deficiencies were doing their gardening. The omega-3 in purslane is alpha-linolenic acid, which your body does not synthesize on its own. Once consumed, your body converts a portion of it into EPA and DHA, the longer-chain omega-3 fatty acids with the most research support. EPA is most strongly associated with anti-inflammatory activity. Chronic low-grade inflammation is now understood to contribute to cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, depression, and the accelerated aging pattern researchers call inflammaging. Omega-3 intake has become one of the most studied variables in nutritional epidemiology precisely because the direction of evidence is so consistent. DHA is most concentrated in brain tissue and in the retina. It is a structural component of neuronal cell membranes. DHA depletion has been linked in multiple studies to increased risk of depression, cognitive decline with aging, and decreased visual acuity. I want to be precise. I am not telling you that eating purslane will prevent or treat any specific condition. The research on dietary ALA conversion has real limitations. What I am telling you is that a diet consistently low in omega-3 precursors has measurable biological consequences. That the modern American diet is substantially low in omega-3 relative to omega-6 fatty acids, and that this imbalance did not exist at the same magnitude in historical diets that included plants like purslane as regular food sources. The magnesium in purslane deserves separate attention. Magnesium participates in over 300 enzymatic processes: protein synthesis, muscle and nerve function, blood glucose regulation, blood pressure regulation, DNA synthesis, and the production of ATP, the molecule that carries energy within your cells. Without adequate magnesium, none of these processes run at full capacity. Surveys of American dietary intake consistently find that a significant portion of the population does not meet the recommended daily intake. This is substantially because the crops dominating the modern food supply are grown in depleted soils and selected for yield and shelf life rather than mineral density. Purslane, growing in your yard without amendments, pulls minerals from whatever soil it inhabits, doing work the industrial food system quietly stopped doing. The vitamin A content is worth noting as well. Purslane provides it as beta-carotene, which your body converts to retinol as needed and cannot accumulate to toxic levels. The conversion rate is self-regulating. 100 grams provides roughly 44% of the recommended daily intake. Vitamin A is essential for immune function, for the integrity of your respiratory tract and gut lining, and for low-light vision. None of these nutrients require a supplement. None require a prescription. None require a relationship with any supply chain. They require only that you stop pulling a specific plant out of your yard. Identification first, because it matters. Purslane has thick, succulent-like leaves, glossy dark green on top, slightly lighter underneath. The stems are reddish to pink, particularly at the base. The whole plant has a fleshy, rubbery quality from its water storage adaptations. It grows low to the ground, spreading outward from a central root. The stems snap cleanly. The leaves have a slightly mucilaginous quality when chewed, which is normal and is one marker of its nutritional density. Do not confuse purslane with spurge. Both grow low and spreading, but when you break a spurge stem, it exudes a white, milky latex. Purslane stems exude nothing. If you break a stem and see white liquid, you have spurge. Spurge is not edible. When in doubt, do not eat it. Raw, purslane holds up in a salad without wilting when dressed. The flavor is mild with a slight tartness and a clean mineral quality. It works well with neutral greens like butterhead lettuce or romaine. A simple preparation, torn purslane, cucumber, tomato, red onion, olive oil, lemon juice, salt, is structurally identical to a basic Greek salad and nutritionally more interesting than most salads you'll assemble from store-bought greens. Cooked, it behaves like spinach but with more body. In a hot pan with olive oil and garlic, it wilts in under 2 minutes. The cooked version is milder in flavor and has a slightly gelatinous quality from the betalain compounds, the same property that makes okra slippery. It works well as a side, folded into eggs or under grain bowls. Mexican verdolaga pairs it with braised pork and tomatillo, a combination refined over centuries into something genuinely excellent. In soups and stews, add it during the last 2 to 3 minutes only. Any longer and it degrades to mush. For harvest, take young growth, stems that have emerged in the last several days. Nutritional density is highest in actively growing tissue. Harvest from the tips, leaving the root system in place, and the plant will continue producing through the season. Wash thoroughly. If the plant has been growing near heavy traffic, herbicide applications, or soil with contamination concerns, do not eat it. To grow purslane intentionally, scatter seeds on the surface of any well-draining soil in full sun after the last frost. Do not cover them. They need light to germinate. Water once to settle them, and then largely leave the bed alone. Here is something that inverts almost everything we've been taught about cultivation. Excessive watering and rich soil actually reduce some of the compounds that make purslane valuable. The stress of growing in ordinary or poor conditions is what drives the plant to produce what you're eating it for. The harder you garden it, the worse you make it. You are growing a plant that prefers you leave it alone. There is an irony at the center of all this that takes time to fully settle. Our generation spends billions of dollars every year on omega-3 supplements derived from fish oil, algae oil, and krill oil. We buy super greens powders freeze-dried and shipped from the other side of the world. We purchase functional foods with nutrients added back during processing because the base ingredients no longer contain them naturally. We are spending extraordinary resources trying to close nutritional gaps that previous generations did not experience at the same scale. And simultaneously, week after week, we pull out of our yards and throw into the trash a plant that addresses several of those gaps directly. This is not about being uninformed. Most of us were never told. The knowledge was not passed down because the generation that would have passed it down was the generation that stopped using the plant. The agricultural system had already adopted the logic that classified Purslane as a problem. The food media of the post-war period was building a culture around the supermarket and the supply chain, not around what was coming up unbidden in the garden. What I'm asking you to do with this information is simpler than it might sound. Not to rethink your entire food system, not to become a forager, just to look at your yard this week with a different quality of attention. Notice what's growing there that you didn't plant. Notice what's growing without being watered. Notice what comes back after you pull it, after the drought, after the frost, after everything that eliminates the plants you deliberately tend. There is information in that persistence. A plant that survives everything you do to discourage it is telling you something about its relationship with this particular piece of ground, this particular climate, this particular soil. That relationship, built over generations of natural selection, is not nothing. It is, in the language of nutrition science, expressed as a dense and unusual nutritional profile. In the language of traditional food cultures, it was expressed simply as something worth eating. Both of those descriptions point to the same reality. What grows voluntarily in your space is not automatically inferior to what you spend money to import into it. That idea, obvious once stated, runs directly counter to the logic of a food system built on the premise that value must be purchased. That nutrition must be manufactured, packaged, priced, and delivered through a chain of transactions, where every step extracts margin, and none of them add the thing that was quietly growing in your garden for free. Purslane is one sentence in a biological conversation happening in your soil for longer than agriculture has existed. It is growing in your yard right now. The only question that remains is whether you're going to keep pulling it out. If this opened something for you, if you're going to look at your yard differently this week, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because Purslane is one plant. There are others growing in the same spaces, carrying the same overlooked nutritional story, waiting for the same quality of attention. Share this with someone who has a yard and has never thought to ask what's growing in it. The knowledge is here. The plant is already in the ground. The next step is simply to stop pulling it out.